In the 1920s, the American Mafia evolved into a sophisticated empire. This was the age of bootlegging, when gangsters were able to make a lot of money through smuggling alcohol, illegal gambling dens, and other criminal activities. While money was coming in, it was all dirty cash. This was bringing in a lot of heat from law enforcement. One gangster of this era completely changed how the mob manages its dirty money. Meyer Lansky played a pivotal role in the evolution of the American Mafia. He was a criminal with an extraordinary talent in mathematics. This talent was used to change how the Mafia approached money laundering with a foolproof technique. This technique expanded the Mafia's wealth and transformed the landscape of financial corruption. In today's video, we're going to delve into who Meyer Lansky was and why he was such an important figure in the Mafia during the Prohibition era. We'll talk about his money laundering technique and the rules he put into place to keep it successful. Before we get into this, let's take a look into his early life and how he got into the world of organized crime. In 1902, Meyer Suchaljanski was born in the Polish city of Grondow. His family immigrated to the US in 1911, and his name was formally changed to Meyer Lansky. He grew up in Manhattan's Lower East Side. While he had a rough childhood, he did excel at mathematics in school. However, he dropped out in the 8th grade and started working in the tool and die industry, eventually switching trades to work as an auto mechanic. The neighborhood that Meyer grew up in featured people from different cultural backgrounds. He was able to make friends with people from all walks of life. Within this diverse neighborhood was also an underground world of crime. Meyer met several acquaintances in the neighborhood who would eventually become valuable business partners. One of the first people that he connected with was Bugsy Siegel. Bugsy was a notorious mobster known for building the Flamingo Casino and a criminal empire. He was involved in bootlegging and various criminal activities, but it was his gambling operations that set him ahead of the game. Meyer and Bugsy formed the Bugs Meyer Gang, a Jewish-American street gang. The two met when they were teenagers. Meyer had the brains and Bugsy had the strength, making them the ultimate combination. The gang was involved in a wide range of criminal activity. One of the main activities was auto theft. They began working with Lucky Luciano, head of the Genovese family in New York. The gang would supply bootleggers with stolen trucks, and Meyer recruited drivers. The gang was known to be vicious and violent. Meyer and Bugs recruited several hitmen who were referred to as Murder Inc. This group of assassins was believed to kill around 400 to 1,000 people. They accepted contract kills, taking out the enemies of mobsters throughout the city. Some of the gang's members, such as Albert Anastasia and Louis Buchalter, became notorious mafia figures on their own. But despite all the violence, Meyer Lansky was able to carve his own reputation in the world of organized crime. He was nicknamed the mob's accountant because he was basically a financial genius. He envisioned every illegal operation the gang was involved in as an enterprise, taking a similar approach as if he were running a business. Eventually, he turned his main line of focus to gambling. His skills in math, along with his connections in the criminal underworld, helped him launch his gambling operations into an empire. Once this empire was established, Meyer would do anything to protect it. Meyer's journey into the gambling industry proved successful. He was determined to open legitimate establishments that were run honestly. Gamblers would enjoy fair games and not have to worry about rigged games, which were common at criminally organized gambling houses of the time. Meyer and Lucky Luciano were known to have a very good partnership. They worked together, along with other key figures in Mafia history, to organize the National Crime Syndicate. This would link together various Mafia groups throughout the country. Of course, Meyer was put in charge of managing the finances for this system. While there's no exact record of how much money was brought in, rumor has it that Meyer's dealings brought in hundreds of millions of dollars. The Mafia has not built its empire legally, but its members still needed to find a legitimate way to explain their income. This is how money laundering came into play. Now, the Mafia didn't exactly invent money laundering. The act of making illegal money legal can be linked back to thousands of years ago when Chinese merchants were making a fortune during a trading ban. But the Mafia basically reinvented the technique. Money laundering in the US goes back to the Prohibition era. The Mafia was bringing in a lot of money from bootlegging activities. Members were able to enjoy a lavish lifestyle with big houses, expensive cars, and designer clothes, among many other luxuries. If they didn't have a legitimate way to explain this income, they would draw unwanted attention to their operation. So, as a cover, they purchased laundromats, a business where customers only pay in cash. It didn't have to necessarily be a laundromat. Any legitimate business would do as a front. Meyer and his crew opened a vehicle rental garage to explain their finances. Now, the laundromats and rental garages were a good way for the Mafia to start this venture, but the cash coming in versus how much a laundromat would typically earn didn't quite balance out. Many Mafia figures were starting to draw in heat. Even the notorious Al Capone was going down for tax evasion. Meyer Lansky didn't want to see the same thing happen to him, so he started to do some research and start working out a technique that would revolutionize the way the Mafia cleaned their dirty money. Meyer devised a plan to clean the money through the Swiss banking system. He would put the illegal money into the bank. Then he would loan the money out to foreign business owners. At the time, many central banks were hesitant about lending money to people in the garment industry, but Meyer saw this as a prime opportunity for his own financial growth. The business owners that were accepting the loans were taking in the dirty money that the gang brought in illegally. Now, there are two outcomes that could come out of this situation, and they both work in Meyer's favor. Either the recipient of the loan pays the money back, giving Meyer clean money, or they will be unable to pay. When this happened, Meyer wouldn't use violence like most Mafia members of the time. Instead, he would take a share of the company and its profits. This would put another legitimate business on Meyer's resume, taking heat away from the gang's illegal operations. Of course, Meyer took a practical approach to laundering money. He followed 5 specific rules to keep his operations going without being suspect. Rule 1. Use a shell company that can be portrayed as a legitimate business on paper. This will be the operation's disguise to keep law enforcement's attention away from the illegal operations. Rule 2. Portray a modest lifestyle. It's not believable that a small laundromat owner would live in a 10-room mansion, fly private jets, and live a lavish lifestyle. The key to staying off the radar is to live a modest lifestyle. Rule 3. Always file your taxes. Show proof that the business revenue matches the lifestyle being funded. Rule 4. Start moving skimmed funds to an offshore bank account. Rule 5. Remain sensible. Don't let greed or the desire to be the most powerful take over. Getting greedy can take down the operation faster than law enforcement. Meyer Lansky's empire came through casinos, which at this point in time were illegal gambling operations, otherwise known as carpet joints. Most carpet joints had rigged games, so the turnouts were always in the house's favor. But Meyer wanted to do things differently. All of his operations were honest and fair. This operation expanded, allowing him to open carpet joints throughout Florida, New Orleans, and New York. At this point in his career, Meyer was well positioned with the Mafia. He used their protection to keep these gambling houses safe from rivals and other criminals. When it came to law enforcement, he had a few tricks up his sleeve and was able to bribe them to turn their heads the other way. A unique thing about his shell businesses is that none of them were in Meyer Lansky's name. Each business had a paid frontman who was familiar with the industry. This allowed the mobster to run the show like an invisible man. He made all the calls, but there were no ties to his name. Meyer's gambling and bootlegging operations were a massive success. The money was coming in and being sent to a Swiss bank account to be laundered. As the wealth accumulated, Meyer began to set his sights on his next business venture. This brought his attention to Cuba. He was able to arrange a deal with dictator Fulgencio Batista that allowed him control over casinos and racetracks. In December of 1946, Meyer held a conference with several American Mafia leaders. This is where he discussed his vision for Havana and how the Mafia could bring in large sums of money, all of which would be laundered using his special technique. Now, there's no concrete proof on this next part, but there have been theories floating around that Meyer also planned Bugsy Siegel's assassination at this conference. Meyer went on to invest a large portion of his wealth in Cuba's casino market. He had money invested in prime locations like the Hotel Nacional and Montmartre Club. He even built his own luxury establishment, the Havana Riviera. So, how successful was Meyer Lansky's operations after all? Here's the thing. On paper, he wasn't worth that much, nothing more than your average businessman. But the reality was, this man owned so much more. Enthusiasts have estimated that by 1960, his empire was worth over $300 million, which would be worth over $3 billion today. Meyer Lansky operated with caution. He watched other figures in organized crime swirl around in legal troubles and was determined not to have this same thing happen to him. That's why he did his research and carefully evaluated his every decision. But as we talked about earlier in this video, Meyer was a pioneer for the Mafia's money laundering technique. If we're going to be technical about it, money laundering wasn't really a thing yet. Sure, it wasn't ethical or legal, but it wasn't exactly a crime either. In a way, he was able to evade law enforcement because authorities didn't know there was a crime to be investigated. Of course, over the years, law enforcement has caught on to money laundering operations. Many Mafia figures and other criminals have been sentenced to jail time for it. However, the term money laundering didn't hit the media until the 1970s. From there, money laundering wasn't officially a crime in the US until 1986, when the Money Laundering Control Act was passed. All of this occurred after Meyer's run with the Mafia. Now, don't get us wrong, Meyer wasn't completely void of the law. He did do a 60-day stint in jail in 1953. In the early 1950s, authorities were investigating lake houses that were being used as fronts for rackets. One in particular that was on their radar was the Arrowhead Inn, which closed in 1947. Several men were arrested, but only Meyer Lansky and James Lynch were named publicly. As Meyer's time in the Mafia was coming to an end, he was indicted on new charges. In 1972, there was evidence that he skimmed millions of dollars from one of the casinos he owned in Las Vegas. At the time, he was residing in Israel. His health was failing and he was recovering from open-heart surgery. According to the FBI vault, his indictment was eventually dismissed because he was too ill to go to trial. Meyer Lansky has left a lasting legacy in Mafia history. He perfected financial resources, whether it be legal or illegal, to keep the Mafia's empire growing. His brilliance revolutionized how the Mafia managed its money. Through skimming, laundering, and investing, he became the American Mafia's financial backbone. This gangster's legacy captivates Mafia enthusiasts around the world because he was able to get to the top without using violence or intimidation. Of course, his Mafia friends were able to help when he needed them, but to pull off a $1 million skimming scheme, he never had to break any bones. He could operate behind the scenes without anyone catching on. Meyer also cemented his legacy by being one of the few honest gambling operators of the Prohibition era. While many in the underworld of crimes used this as an opportunity to scam money from patrons, Meyer used it as a way to expand his business. People didn't view him as a criminal, they thought of him as a generous businessman. While Meyer's efforts may have paved the road for Mafia members to launder money offshore, it also kicked off law enforcement's anti-money laundering efforts. Towards the end of Meyer's Mafia career, there was a lot more heat. This upped authorities' efforts on monitoring suspicious transactions and tracking down financial crime. This wraps up our story on Meyer Lansky's infamous money laundering technique. Meyer was one of the pioneer gangsters from the Prohibition era. While he was lesser known than Al Capone and Bugsy Siegel, he played a very important role in the American crime syndicate. He earned a reputation as the financial godfather of the time and was able to operate seamlessly behind the scenes. He perfected skimming techniques and money laundering operations that took the Mafia's finances to the next level. It also kept authorities off their tracks. Meyer was always brilliant when it came to numbers. This is why it was no surprise to fellow mobsters like Lucky Luciano that Meyer was the perfect choice to handle finances. He figured out how to skim money, place it in accounts offshore, then lend it out to receive clean money back. He was able to get away with this crime for many years, helping the Mafia clean large amounts of cash. By the time law enforcement caught on to him, he was ruled too sick to stand trial. Thank you for staying tuned to the end of our video. We encourage all of our viewers to learn more about anti-money laundering laws and how law enforcement is keeping you protected. That's all for today. Make sure you hit like, share, and follow to see more Mafia Mystique content.